In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the bare necessities of what it takes to get started in beekeeping, taking a look at the equipment that you're going to need, the financial cost, and the time investment it's going to take. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Ewell Acres podcast, where we are rooted in nature, taking examples from nature and implementing them into our own gardening adventures with the aid of modern technology. And I'm your host, Bryson Ewell. Today, we're going to be talking about the bare necessities of beekeeping. What does it take to actually get started? Oftentimes, when you're starting a new hobby or a project, you can often, in most cases, expect to take twice as much time as you think it's going to take and 3 times the financial cost you think it's going to take. Oftentimes, we way undervalue how much it's actually going to cost and how much it's actually going to take to get into it before we decide we should really be doing this. And oftentimes, I've noticed with a lot of projects that I personally want to get started, I don't fully understand the true commitment, financial, and time it's going to take to really do those things. So today, we're going to be breaking it down into 3 different categories. And we're going to be taking a look at the equipment that you need realistically to get started in beekeeping. We're going to be looking at the financial costs, what it takes to get that equipment, and then we're also going to be talking about how much that equipment costs. And the 3 categories that I'm going to be breaking it down into is the items that I personally think are a necessary to have to get the job done. Then we're going to go into the is it not really necessary, but I would highly recommend to have to make your life a whole lot easier. And then we're going to get into, you know what, these items really aren't necessary and you don't absolutely need them to get started, but there's some things that are just nice to have that in the long term you'll probably eventually want to upgrade to once you get to that point. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Now, first, how we're going to go about doing it is I'm going to first explain what equipment you need, what equipment is nice to have, what the purpose is for that equipment, and what it's used for. And then I'm going to tell you, in my own personal opinion, if it is something that is a necessity, something that is nice to have, or something that is going to be you know what, this really isn't needed, but it's going to make your life easier. And I'm going to split it into those 3 categories. Then towards the end of the podcast, I'm going to tell you what the actual cost is. So that way, when you're looking at the items itself, you don't look at that item and go, oh boy, that's the cost? No, thank you. I want to first tell you what the equipment is, what it's used for, so you get an idea if you actually decide you want to get it or not. Then, once you look at the equipment, then towards the end, see what the financial cost is. Then, once we talk about the financial costs of everything, I'm going to break it down into 3 categories of what is the items that you can expect to pay for the need to have, the price range of that on the low end and the high end, the nice to have but still highly recommended, or I should say the not necessarily but high recommended, and then the 3rd category of nice to have. Now, there is a 4th category technically when you get into beekeeping, which is all the fun accessories, all the bells and whistles that you can get up and above beyond that. And let's face it, with every single hobby that you get into, there is going to be a tremendous amount of those bells and whistles that you can dive deep into the rabbit hole. I'm not even going to touch those items on this podcast. It's, for this episode, going to be just what is the necessarily but high recommend, and the nice to have. So, the very first item that you're going to need when you get into beekeeping, as strange as this sounds, is bees. Everyone kind of looks at equipment, they look at other things, and they kind of skip the whole bees part of it. But you have to understand, you can have all the nice equipment that you have, but if you don't have honeybees, then you're up a creek without a paddle. It's just absolutely not worth it whatsoever. So first thing you want to take a look at is, where are you going to source your bees? How are you going to acquire your bees? Because if you can't even acquire bees, you can have all the equipment you have, but all it's going to be is a very, very expensive dust collection unit. In general, there are 4 different ways that you can go about acquiring bees. The first one is going to be what's called acquiring a swarm. Now, what a swarm of bees are is, typically speaking, you have a hive that is going to be growing, become very healthy, and it's going to outgrow the hive, the home where it currently lives. Then what's going to happen is the old queen and about half the colony are going to what's called swarm. They're going to leave the hive and go look for a new home. This is by far going to be the cheapest way of doing it, but it's also going to be the least likely and hardest because there's no guarantee. How you acquire bees via swarm is you have to already have a beehive and the bees are getting ready to swarm. You quickly capture them and put them in a new hive. Or you set up a trap hive or a nice home for them with some smelling attractant stuff inside of them and hope that a hive or a swarm goes and finds that as a nice place. And that could be either a domesticated hive or a wild beehive that decides to make that box home. That's what a swarm is. The next way that you could go about collecting bees is going to be what's called a package. Now, a package is going to be approximately 3 pounds of bees, or roughly, give or take the size, it's generally estimated to be about 10,000 bees inside of a box. And all it is going to be a plastic or wood box that's going to be in a rectangular shape. Inside, you're going to have the bees, you're going to have a queen in a smaller box inside that to keep her separated. So that way it gives a chance for the bees to get to know her. Now, to explain what a package is oftentimes beekeepers are going to have dozens, if not hundreds of hives. They're going to take, as weird as this sounds, they're going to take a cup or some type of a scoop, and they're just going to scoop a whole bunch of bees. And they're going to throw them in a box, and they're going to close the box. Then they're going to take a mated queen, which is a queen that has had the opportunity to say hello to a very fine fellow and become impregnated with the future generation of bees. They're going to take that queen and stick her in a smaller box with a piece of candy to block it. Now, each queen is going to emit what's called a pheromone to say, "I am your queen, follow me." Now, when you gather a whole bunch of bees all together, they could be all from one hive, they could be from multiple hives, but they may not recognize that queen as royalty. And so by taking that queen and separating them out, it will give those new bees an opportunity for that queen to say, "I am your queen, you should follow me as your royalty." And that will give an opportunity for the other bees or subjects of that queen, if you will, to accept her and say, "Yes, my liege, we will bow to you." And that will give them the opportunity. Now, in many cases, if you were just to take that queen, throw her in and say, "Accept them, go," you're going to have a Russian Tsar 1917 case where they're going to decide to acquire new management, and they're just going to kill that queen, unfortunately. Whether you want to do it Russian Tsar style, the French style with the guillotine, whatever your chosen method analogy is. In many cases, they will kill that queen because they do not recognize her as theirs. As bad as this sounds, if you've got a bunch of bees that don't recognize their queen, they will kill her, which means they don't have a queen to follow, which means all of those other bees will die as well. So you have to be very, very careful and try and give that new queen time to accept that. That's one of the reasons why the swarm is kind of advantageous, because those older bees have already accepted the queen as their own. They will protect her. They will die for her. In a package, You don't have that opportunity. This is brand new bees, brand new queen put together. Aside from the bees being inside this little wooden box or plastic container, there's also going to be a number 1, number 10 can, however large size it is, slid in inside of that wooden container as well, with a few holes punctured in the can with some sugar syrup. And that's going to be a food source to keep the bees alive for approximately a week. Now, this is going to be a very, very short-term thing. The beekeepers gather up the bees, gather up the queen, put her in this box, and it is only meant for a 2 to 3 period day of time. 3 to 5 days, absolute max. Once you start to get to day 6, 7, you're going to expect to have mass die-off. These bees need a hive. They need a place to call home. So this is very temporary, in, out. Get the bees in, get the bees out to transport them home. The next way that you can go about acquiring bees is going to be what's called a nuke. Now what this is this is going to be a small baby hive. What you're going to do is you're going to take a small little box that already has an established queen, that already has bees that have already started to draw out honey on the comb itself, that is basically a small condominium, small townhome, if you will, beehive. It's already established, it's already getting going, and it's going to be a good, great starter fund. Then the fourth way to do it is going to be purchasing an established hive. Now this thing is already gone through winter, it's fully going, it's already got 2-3 boxes. This thing is ready to kick in gear and move forward. The next thing that you're going to need is a home for the bees. Now this is called a hive. Now there are going to be 3 main different ways that you can get a hive. The first one is basically never talked about anymore. It's never really included, and it has not been an industry standard since at least the 40s, the 50s, but it's fun, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about it anyway. One is called the log, or what also a skep hive. Now what this is you basically take grass and weave them into a barrel, and then you would take small honeycomb, attach it to the top, and then you would throw in the bees and say, good luck. Or you'd physically get a log, drill it out, and do the same thing. Now, this has fallen out of favor for a couple of reasons. One, it's just ridiculously hard to work with the bees. You can't get in the hive, you can't look for diseases, you can't look for other issues, and if you want to harvest the honey, you have to physically cut out the entire comb, crush it up, basically destroying the hive. You might as well go back to caveman days, find a wild honey, and just be like the bear, carve out the honeycomb, and do that for your harvesting, because that's basically what you're doing. It just is not common anymore, and I highly, highly discourage this method. But I like to talk about it because there are a few weirdos that enjoy it. So next is going to be the top bar hive. Now this is going to be a compromise between the skep hive and the Langstroth hive. What the top bar hive is it's going to be longer, cylindrical, and it's going to have small little wooden slats that you can lift up. This is kind of considered a little bit more a natural way of beekeeping, because what you do is you have small little wooden bars that go across this log essentially. Now it is a little bit different, but that's the best way I can describe it, is you have removable slides across a log. Now this method is similar to the skep, but it allows you to individually inspect individual frames. It allows you to get into the hive. It allows you to look for honey. It allows you to look for diseases, and it is a little bit more natural, if you will, to what the bees are more similar to what they would accomplish in nature. But I personally don't like this method because you only have a limited amount of space. You are locked into this specific space. If you want honey if you want those things, you still have to physically destroy the comb. And it's a very resource-intensive way of beekeeping, meaning if you want honey, you're going to cut out that comb, and the bees are going to have to completely rebuild the hive. They're going to have to completely rebuild the comb, and it's going to take a tremendous amount of resources for the bees to first build the beeswax, draw out that beeswax, so that way they can put honey inside of it. So it's very expensive resource-wise for the bees. But if you like honeycomb and you're going to eat it anyway, or you're just doing 1 or 2 hives and you're doing it for the fun of it and doing bees primarily for the pollination factors of bees, then go for it. It works perfectly fine, but just keep in mind, you will be destroying the hive if you want to get at the honey. The third and by far most popular way of doing bees is going to be doing the Langstroth hive. Whether you want to call it a universal hive, standard hive, Langstroth hive, they're basically all the exact same method, and that is by far the industry standard, and I would just guesstimate 98 and 99% of all honeybees that are in production, whether they're hobby or commercial use in modern society, is going to use the universal standard or the Langstroth hive method. Essentially what this is going to be some sort of a box, and you're going to have individual boxes that you can stack one on top of another. And this allows you to be able to, if you need to get into the middle of the hive, you can take boxes off. You can easily pull individual frames out, inspect them. You can look for the queen. You can easily look for diseases. You can look for varroa mite. It allows you a much greater opportunity to inspect the hive. That's why it's become so popular, and that's why it's become the industry standard that most everyone uses, including myself. Now, the different definitions that you use, whether you want to use a universal, a standard hive, or a Langstroth hive, the main difference in those is going to be what part of the world you are in. When you're in Western Europe, the UK, they're going to more commonly come in contact with the universal or standard hive. If you're in United States or Canada, you are much more likely to encounter the Langstroth hive. They are literally the exact same thing. The only major difference between the two is going to be the physical dimensions of the box, both the width, the length, and height. But they basically all function the exact same way. You're going to have individual frames that you can put in where the bees build wax foundation, draw it out, making small little holes so that they can then deposit honey and then seal with more wax for storage. One of the reasons why I like the Langstroth hive system is when you go to make honey, what you do is you basically cut the uttermost top layer off of the honey, and then you're able to have it seep out. You're able to take just a very bare minimum amount of wax off, so that way you're able to gain access to the honey. This limits the amount of wax that the bees are required to rebuild. And so resource-wise, it's very efficient for the bees when you're talking about harvesting honey. It's going to take a lot less resources for them to continue to reproduce the honey. That's why I personally like the Langstroth hive as far as the home that it takes. So from here on out, when we're talking about other equipment that we need, for the most part, this equipment is going to pertain primarily to the Langstroth hive system, just because that's what most people use. And that's especially what I recommend brand new beekeepers to work with, is going to be using the Langstroth hive. Now, some people ignore this part, but I personally consider it to be very important. This is going to be some sort of a platform or a stand that you put your hive on. Now, you could very easily take your box hive and stick it directly on the ground. Me personally, though, I would not recommend that. That's going to open you up to ants, to little critters, to skunks, easily being able to get into your hive. It's also going to very easily allow other things to attack your hive. So by putting your hive on a stand, even if you have only one or two hives, that's going to give you a lot of protection against critters. Now, even if you're dealing with hundreds of hives, you're going to see beekeepers, all of them pretty much in the commercial world, put their beehives on stands. Now, some of these stands could be as easy, as simple as a pallet, but it at least elevates the hive just a little bit to get them a little bit off the ground. I would highly, highly discourage you from putting your beehive down on the ground. Now, this is the first thing that I am going to deviate a little bit. So it's absolutely necessary that you have bees. It's absolutely necessary that you have a hive or a home for the bees. But it is not necessary to have a stand for the beehive. However, I would highly recommend it. This stand could be something as simple as a pallet or a block of wood that you set it on. A really simple way to build a stand, what I would recommend, is go get yourself 4 cinder blocks. Now, these are the ones that are going to be a little bit bigger than you want. The dimensions of these cinder blocks are going to be approximately 16 inches long, 6 inches wide by 8 inches wide. It's going to be a rectangle. You can find them for very cost effective at your local big box store. Then what I'd recommend is get yourself 2 fence posts, 2 pine poles that are going to be approximately 4 to 5 inches thick and about 8 feet long. What you can do is take this cinder block, set it up on its side, making certain that you have holes in the cinder block. So it's going to be elevated approximately 16 inches off the ground. Then you can take the 2 fence poles and string them through the hole in the cinder block. So what you'll do is you'll have 2 cinder blocks sitting side by side with a post or a pole running through it, and those cinder blocks are going to be approximately 8 feet wide. Then you're going to take a second 2 cinder blocks with a pole running through those holes too. And then you're going to have it set up kind of like railroad tracks. And so that way you can have 2 railroad tracks that are approximately the width of the beehive and the 2 poles running alongside them. That way you can take your beehive and set it across the way, evenly distributed across the 2 poles. Now this will give you a nice little platform, elevating it about 1.5 feet off the ground. That way it prevents grass from growing in the hive. It helps to protect against ants, other small critters. It elevates it a little bit so it's not as easy as skunks and other critters to potentially get in it as well. And if it starts to get really, really windy or other issues, then what you can do is it gives you a platform. You can easily take some ratchet straps, wrap it around the beehive, wrap it around the poles themselves. Then you can take some other anchor points, whether it's metal, you can take some stakes and stake them into the ground. And that will help to give you a stronger base that you can secure against if you live in an area with high winds. In particular, in my case, some of my bees are in bear country. And so by taking those hives, strapping them to those log poles, and then taking the cinder blocks in those log poles and securing them to the ground with anchor points. But that's something I have to deal with in my country where my bees are located up in the mountains. So is the stand necessary? No, but I highly recommend it. Then when you're looking at the construction of the beehive itself for the Langstroth hive, you're going to have the bottom board. There's 2 types of bottom boards you're going to have. It basically serves as the foundation. You can get a solid bottom board or what's called as a screen bottom board. The solid bottom board is going to be what it sounds like. It is just a solid bottom board. It's going to act as a landing platform so the bees can fly in, they can land. It's going to help protect against wind and other stuff blowing in. And it's going to be a great, solid, standard thing. If you want to go into summertime, if it gets really hot in your area like me, I have a screen bottom board for some of my bees. So that way, in the really hot summer, it will allow airflow to go through the screen in the bottom. Now, this is important. It has a screen that will allow stuff like air to go in, but it'll help to keep little critters, rats, mice, other things that might want to say hello to your bees and eat some of the honey out. That's another reason why, by the way, I like elevating the hives off of the ground is mice. You have no idea how many times I've seen little mice utterly destroy a hive. You would be surprised how attractive honey is to critters for a really great nutritious source of protein. Oftentimes, this is just me personally, I get one of each. And what I do is I do a solid bottom board in the colder months because I can get feet of snow where I'm at. So I get a solid bottom board to help protect it against the elements. And then in the hotter months, I move to a screen bottom board. So you can alternate between the two. But either way, you are going to need some sort of a bottom board. And this is just standard construction for the Langstroth hive. Then the next part you're going to have is what's called the brood box. Now this is going to be the main birthing chamber where the queen lays her eggs, where it's going to be the nursery, they grow up, and typically this is going to consist of 2 boxes. And each of these boxes can have 8 frames, they can have 10 frames, but typically speaking, you're going to need 2 boxes on the bottom to help act as the birthing chamber and nursery for the bees to be born, grow up, and become adults. Then you're going to move up, and this part is not necessary. Sometimes people have it, sometimes they don't, but you can have what is called a queen excluder. And what this is this is a metal screen that is just large enough for the bees to go up. It is just enough for the bees to go down. However, because the queen is doing her thing, doing her job, birthing a lot, she actually has a much larger badunk than the other bees. That's how you can identify the queen from the drones or the regular lady working bees, is the queen has a very large exterior. And because that large exterior is a little bit bigger, the screen is just big enough so that way the worker bees can go up and down, but the queen cannot. So it's going to keep the queen down in the lower chambers to just birth. If you don't have that queen excluder in the hive, then the queen is going to go all over the hive. She's going to go to the top, she's going to go to the bottom, she's going to go side to side. Wherever there's an open spot, she's going to lay an egg. Now, some people don't use queen excluders, and this is not something that's necessary. It is one of those nice to have because it keeps her in a specific contained area where you know she's going to be. Now, the trouble with this is if the queen is in a specific area and she runs out of room to lay eggs, then that's going to trigger inside the hive saying, we've run out of room. And so the queen and the older hive bees are going to say, you know what? We've run out of room. We can no longer expand. And that is going to trigger a swarming mentality in the hive and have them go. So that is one thing to keep in mind, that you need to give them adequate room. That's why typically you need 2 boxes for the brood chamber. The next thing that you can have that I kind of forgot to mention, which we can go a little bit earlier, is what is called an entrance reducer. What this does is this makes the entrance where the bees fly in and out a little bit smaller. Now, where I find this necessary is when you have a brand new hive, whether you're using a swarm or a package, you're not going to have as large of a colony. There's just not as large of a population of bees that can as easily defend the home. And so what this does is it makes a smaller hole. It makes it easier for the bees to defend themselves. Another thing why I like it is during the much colder months, it helps to reduce the doorway so not as much cold air can get into the hive. I live in a very cold, very snowy climate. I put the queen excluder, or I put the entrance reducer in the front to help limit the area so that way it is easier for the bees to stay warm during those much colder months. Now, is this necessary? No, but I highly recommend it. Then, next, what you're going to have is you're going to have your honey boxes or the honey chamber. And those boxes are going to be on top of the brood boxes. Now, this is simply where it sounds like is these are extra boxes that you put on top of the brood chamber, so that way it gives them extra room as the bees are collecting pollen, as they're collecting nectar. It gives them an area to make honey. The main reason why bees make honey is this is a food storage for them to be able to make it through winter. If they don't have enough room to make honey, they're not going to have enough room to do that, and they could die over the winter time. But they're also not going to give you enough honey as well. And if they don't have enough room to make honey, once again, it's going to trigger something inside the bees saying, we ran out of room, let's go swarm and find a new place to live. That's one of the great advantages of the Langstroth hive is if you need more room, just add another box. Just add another box. I've seen some hives that have 7, 8, 9 boxes tall. Now, in my personal opinion, that gets a little excessive at that point. Just go ahead and take 2 or 3 of those honey boxes off, add another empty honey box, and then you move on with life. Now, when do you know when to add a new box? Sorry, I forgot. The honey boxes is falling underneath the necessary category. You have to have these boxes. So, if they don't have them, they can't make honey. Next, after that, you're going to have what's called an inner cover. Now, what this is kind of like the walls inside your house. Are walls necessary inside your house? No, but they help to insulate it so you're not directly against the outside wall. If you ever leaned against your outside wall, that outside bedroom tends to be a little bit colder than a room on the inside towards the center of the house. And that's all the inner cover does, is it helps to create a small little insulation gap between the inner cover and the top roof cover. And that's what it helps to do. Whether it's really hot, it helps to keep it a little bit cooler so air can escape. It also helps so that way it helps to keep it a little bit warmer on the inside. Is this something that's necessary? No, but I highly recommend it. The reason why is because you have something called the top cover, which is going to be the roof of your beehive. And in my area, it can get very, very hot in the summertime. We're talking 100 degrees Fahrenheit plus, 30 degrees plus Celsius for those in that area. When you're looking at that, you're going to be getting very nice, hot, and humid on the inside. When you're dealing with hot temperatures, that humid air inside the hive is going to be rising towards the top. Then when that hot, humid, moist air hits that top cover, it's going to start to form condensation on the top. When it forms condensation, that condensation is going to drip down. If that has no inner cover, that condensation is going to drip directly on the bees. That could encourage varroa mite, that could encourage mold, that could encourage other diseases. By having that inner cover, that allows a place for that condensation to drip down on the inner cover to help protect the bees. It helps to create that small little protective gap between the two. So that's why I highly recommend an inner cover, and it's absolutely necessary to have a top cover so you're protecting your bees from the elements, whether it's the rain, snow, bears, it's needed. That is the home of the Langstroth hive in a nutshell. Next, we get into equipment. Now, when you're looking at equipment, we're going to be talking about first protective gear. First and foremost, when you see beekeepers, you're always going to see some sort of a weird hat with a net surrounding their face. That is called a veil. Now, is this something that's needed? No. There are some beekeepers that successfully go without this, but I would highly recommend having a veil at absolute minimum for protective conditions. Bees naturally like to go for the most. If bees get excited, if they get angry, one of the dangers of bees is they have stingers. They will sting you. And as a natural defense mechanism over the years, bees have found out that they like to go for the more sensitive areas of the body. Now, I'm not exaggerating when I say I have been stung in the eye before because I wasn't wearing a veil. It hurts. I've been stung up the nose before. I've been stung inside my mouth, and I've been stung inside the ears. Those sensitive locations, eyes, ears, mouth, nose, on the face, there's lots of nerves, there's lots of sensitivities there. Bees love stinging you in the face. It hurts a lot. I highly, highly recommend, at bare minimum, getting a veil, so that way it is going to be useful to help protect those sensitive areas around your head, around your face. That's something as simple as getting a head cover that you can cinch around the neck, so that way you can tuck it into your shirt, and so that way bees aren't attacking your face. So is it needed? No, but I highly recommend. Next thing that you're going to use is going to be gloves. Now, when you're first starting out, are gloves necessary? No, but I highly recommend it. It's just a basic bare bones necessity of beekeeping. Your hands are going in the hive. You're going to have bees crawling all over your hand. If you're not used to it, you're going to have little crawlies all over your hand. You're going to get nervous, quick movement. You're going to annoy the bees. They're going to jab you. The number one most likely place you're going to get stung by far is going to be your hand, because your hands are always going into the belly of the beast to pull frames out, to inspect, to look at them. If you're not careful, a quick twitch, you can easily smash bees. And when you kill bees, that makes them a little bit upset. They're going to defend their home, their castle. They're going to sting back. One time I remember, I actually got stung 20 times in the hand during one day. My whole arm swelled up. I looked like I had a flipper. I had to go to the emergency room because I was a little bit of concern because I had lost sensitivity in my hand. Well, at that point, it's like, yeah, your hand swells up like a flipper. You should probably go get that checked out. But keep that in mind, gloves are a necessity. Sometimes I don't wear gloves. Sometimes I do, depending on how bees are aggravated, if I'm pulling honey, if I'm just doing a quick hive inspection. It can vary from day to day. If you want to go more protection beyond that, you can do what's called a jacket. Now, that's going to be what it sounds like, a jacket. It's going to go from the waist all the way up to the head. That's going to have the veil included in that whole setup. So it's going to be kind of like a hoodie that you can pull over your head. It's going to have the screen on top, and it's going to be a long sleeve that will go all the way down to your arm. So that way you can take your gloves and tuck it in underneath, or you can have it go over the sleeve so you'll get full protection for the entire upper half of your body. Next, more protection upon that is going to be a bee suit, which is going to be similar to a Tyvek suit, where it covers your entire body from your ankles to your head and all in between. Now, as you move up, you're going to get higher in protection, but you're also going to get higher in expense. So veil is going to be the cheapest, then gloves, then bee jacket, then bee suit. Now, a bee jacket, bee suit are falling underneath that nice to have category. I personally would say gloves are a highly recommend, and I would put a veil as the need to have. Next that you get into is the type of equipment that you physically use. You're going to be looking at first your hive tool. That's going to be your multi-tool that you use for everyday jobs. You're going to use it to pry frames out. You're going to be using it to pull boxes together. Bees are very industrious, and they are very good at sealing up cracks. Just like us, when it's a little bit cold outside, what you're going to do is you're going to take some tape, you're going to seal up the edges, you're going to take paint, you're going to take some drywall. You want to seal your home up to keep the cool air in, the hot air out, or vice versa in the wintertime, warm air in, cold air out. Bees do the exact same thing, except their form of construction is beeswax. They will use beeswax and seal up every little nook and cranny all over that hive. You will be surprised how industrious and how quickly they can seal things up. So that beehive tool is used to help pry things apart. It's used to help kind of scrape things. It is, in my personal belief, an absolute necessity. The next one that you have is going to be a bee brush. All it is a small, soft bristle brush that you can use to gently brush bees off of a frame, off the side of the hive, so you don't crush them. Now, this is something that's not necessary, but it's still highly recommend, especially for brand new beekeepers. If you want to do it on the cheap, you could also use an old credit card, maybe even that old Blockbuster card that we still absolutely need these days. Because, you know, that one Blockbuster that still is open in Alaska, is absolutely needing you to do the rental, but I'm pretty sure the rest of the world doesn't need your Blockbuster card. Rip Blockbuster, you were an intimate part of my childhood on a Friday night going out with the family to enjoy popcorn and a movie. Every Friday night, we went, got some candy, we got a movie, and that was primo for my childhood. My kids will never know the joy of having to wait a full week to go to Blockbuster. But you can use an old card if that's something that you want to do. Next, you can take a look at is using an uncapping knife. Now, all this is this has helped to scrape wax off a little bit in places. When you go to harvest your honey, it's used to scrape off the very top of the wax capping so that way you can get at the honey. Now, this gets into the highly recommended, nice to have kind of borderline area. Is it necessary? No, but it's nice to have. And that's kind of in that weird gray area.
The next item on our list that we're going to be talking about is a smoker. Now, what a smoker is, it is a small little metal canister with small little bellows on it. You're going to go ahead and put some sort of a flammable material. Some people like using pine pellets. Some people like using pine needles. You're just looking for something that's going to be very flammable, that's going to be a little bit more on the green side. So it's going to provide a lot of smoke, but you want to provide green, cool smoke. So that's going to be the important part, is you want to provide cool smoke so it's not going to be heating the bees out. What the smoker does is after you get it lit, once it's going, you're going to be able to puff your hive with gentle, cool puffs of smoke. This is going to mask the pheromone and the communication that the bees have with each other, keeping them a little bit calmer. So that gives you time to work in the hive and work a little bit better. Next item on the list, we've already talked about it. It's going to be smoker fuel. That smoker fuel, like I mentioned before, could be pine needles. It could be something that you purchase, which is going to be like pine wood pellets. It could be pine cones. It could be grass that you find around the yard. It could be something that you find that's free. It could be something that you physically go and purchase. I personally, one thing really like that I use is burlap sackcloth. It lights really easily. It creates a tremendously amount of smoke. It burns really well, and it's going to give you an instant, really easy light. Both of these items combined, smoker and smoker fuel, are kind of one unit. Now, this falls underneath the category of highly recommend. It's going to make working with the hive a whole lot simpler, and it's going to make your overall experience much better when it comes to working with the bees. Next item on this list is going to be the hand extractor. Now, when we're talking about an extractor, you're going to go through the season, you're going to let the bees build up, they're going to draw out their honey, and they're going to create a large amount of honey that you finally have worked all season with them. You're finally going to get the fruits of your labor. Delicious, delicious honey. Now it is time. The hand extractor is a machine that you can take to carve the top of the wax off the frames, place them in a cylindrical tube, and this is going to rotate the frames in a circular motion. And using that centrifugal force, it is used to help fling the honey onto the side of the barrel. That's going to slowly drip down, and then you can more easily collect your honey. Now, this is something that is nice to have. It makes the honey much easier to harvest. Next item on this list, and that's going to be a double strainer. All of this is it's going to be a fine wire mesh colander that you can easily commonly find when you're cooking. The reason why the double strainer is nice is it's going to have two different sizes of mesh. It's going to have a slightly wider one, and then it's going to have a slightly smaller one. Now, the reason why this is helpful is because when you get honey, when you go harvest, inevitably, unfortunately, when you go to the grocery store, you're going to have nice, clean honey. It looks gorgeous. Well, the honey that you get out of your hive is going to be raw, unfiltered honey. Now, bees are going to be around this. bees unfortunately are going to die. You're going to have body parts. You're going to have wings. You're going to have legs. You're going to have potentially a dead bee or two. You are going to have chunks of wax. What you can do is take your honey that you're straining and let it sift through the strainer. The larger mesh is going to help filter out those really large chunks of beeswax. They're going to help to filter out the body parts, the bees, the dead bees themselves. Unfortunately, that is just a part of beekeeping. The finer mesh is going to help to filter out some of the smaller particles of beeswax to make it a little bit cleaner, a little bit more less cloudy towards the nicer grade that you would typically see at the grocery store. You're going to need something to hold your honey in, to store your honey in. The nice thing about honey, though, is it's a natural preservative. It doesn't need tight sealed containers. It's not going to go bad in a week like your milk that sits on the counter. It's not going to curdle. You could leave this thing in a jar, open air, for months, years. It's going to be perfectly fine. But you're going to want some way to store it. This could be as simple as a 5-gallon bucket with a lid if you're dealing with tens of pounds of honey, or it could be something like a mason jar to help put it in smaller categories. Now, this item that I've included, this final item that I've included in the necessary need to have category, is going to be very controversial. Some people don't consider it a need whatsoever. In fact, I would venture to say the vast majority of beginning beekeepers, even moderate beekeepers, do not have this item. That is going to be an EpiPen, or more commonly known as epinephrine. There are generic versions of this that you can get. What is epinephrine, EpiPen? Just as a reminder, this is oh no, I got stung by a bee. Well, in case I have, and if I go into anaphylactic shock, I need to help save the life. You take a pin, jab it in the thigh, and you get a shot of epinephrine. My personal belief, this is absolutely necessary. In my own personal belief, now I know this is controversial. If you do not own an EpiPen, you are not a responsible beekeeper. You should not keep bees. It is not worth putting it at risk of a person in life. You need to have an EpiPen if you are a responsible beekeeper. Every single beekeeper needs one of these. If you're not planning on getting an EpiPen, don't become a beekeeper. Once again, I know it's controversial, just my own personal opinion. Now, some of these items that we're going to be talking about today, financially speaking, if you're not lucky enough to have a local farm and ranch store like me personally, I am truly blessed. Within a decent, manageable drive, I have 5, 6 different farm and ranch stores, many of which are different companies that I can go to purchase bee equipment. I am very blessed to do so. If you don't have a farm and ranch store close by you, then one way that you can acquire some of this bee equipment is going to be on the internet. And to make it a little bit easier for you, I went ahead and added some links down below that you can go ahead and click on if you're watching this podcast via YouTube, or if you're looking at through Audible or Spotify or one of the other many streaming services. In the show notes, I added some links that you could click on to go ahead and provide you with some of this equipment. Now, just so you know, I am not affiliated with any of these links. However, because it is a link, because it's something that I provided down there, I do get a small commission from these. And so if you are gaining value out of this, if you're gaining knowledge and you just love this, one of the ways that you could financially support this podcast is by clicking on that link below. Now, it's not going to cost you anything extra. It's going to be the exact same price had you gone to Amazon yourself and purchased this equipment. However, it does give a small kickback to the channel to help support it if that's something that you like doing, which I greatly appreciate. Thank you very much. And now it is time for the question of the day. Today's question is provided to us by Anonymous, and they asked, hey, a family friend is getting out of the beekeeping and has a lot of old used beekeeping equipment that they want to sell me for much cheaper than I would be able to purchase brand new. Is this something that is wise, that I should be doing. It would be very cost effective for me to do so. So, Anonymous, you are not going to like my answer. Unless you know the exact history, unless you know every little thing about what's going on with these bees, my personal opinion is I would not touch that bee equipment with a 10-foot pole. Now, if we're talking a veil, if we're talking gloves, if we're talking a hive tool, something like that, go for it. Bee extractor or a honey extractor, go for it. If we're talking the hive itself, frames, the brood chamber, we're talking deep supers, shallow supers, bottom boards, do not touch that thing with a 10-foot pole. You're dealing with potentially wax moth. You're talking about European foul brood. You're talking about American foul brood. You don't know what kind of diseases that hive may potentially have had. They could have no bees because they got American foul brood throughout that entire thing. Once a beehive gets American foul brood, the only way that I know of how to take care of that hive is to burn it to the ground and hope and pray to whatever deity you believe in that that disease does not spread to the other hives, because that is a one train ticket to Doomsville. Your bees are deader than a doornail. So, my personal opinion, do not ever buy used beehives unless you know for certainty 100% the exact history of that hive. Now that we've talked about the materials, the basics that you're going to run into that are the most common tools that you're going to find, let's get to the financials of it. I purposely put financials towards the end because this part really scares people away. Keep in mind, beekeeping is fun, beekeeping is awesome. It is a great pollination source to help with your bees, but it is not cheap. Beekeeping is a very expensive hobby to get into. Keep in mind, you can do things cheaper, but this is going to be erring on the side of caution towards a little bit more expensive. First, we are going to be talking about the bees themselves. We talked about 4 different ways that you can actually go to acquire bees. With cost of bees, by far the cheapest is going to be a swarm. You can get those for free, but it's going to be very hard to try and receive one because you're basically hoping that another hive swarms, the bees come to you, and then you're able to catch it in a box, another hive that you already have. A 3-pound package that you can buy either online or at the store, you can expect to pay in the $160 range roughly. With a nuke, you can expect to be in about the $190 range, with an established hive coming in the most expensive at $300. Now that we've gotten past the bees themselves, there are some items, the rest of these items that we're going to be talking about is going to be items that are individually sold, saying what is going to be the most expensive that you can expect this to be. However, if you want to make these items just a little bit cheaper by bundling them together, you can actually come and find what is called a beginner's kit. What that's going to have is that's going to have some of the beginner essential tools that you can expect to find that you're going to need, like the bare minimum to get you started. That's going to include a solid bottom board, 1 super, 9 frames, an inner cover, top cover, a beehive tool, bee brush, capping knife, smoker fuel. Sometimes they'll have a few other like nice to have tools inside, outside, intermixed, but that's typically what you're going to find in a beginner kit. That bundled together, you can expect to normally find within the $200 to $200 range. We are looking at the bottom board. You can expect to pay about $30 for that roughly as of spring 2023. Screen bottom board in the $40 range. Now, once again, this is my area, potentially online. What you're going to find, different localities are going to have these prices roughly adjusted. This is to give you a general idea what you can expect to pay for. Next, you're going to need your boxes where you put your frames, where the bees can lay eggs for the queen, where you get your honey box, things like that. Now, one thing that I didn't mention before is you're going to have three different sizes of boxes. One's going to be a deep, one's a medium, one's a shallow. Basically, they're going to have the same dimensions. The only difference is the height. The reason why you choose different sizes is the weight of the boxes. A deep super, you can expect to weigh when it's fully laid out between the 80 100 pound range. A medium, you can expect to be in the 60 to 80 pound range, and a small, you can expect to be in the 40 to 60 pound range. Now, the reason why this matters is if you're not able to lift as much weight, if you're a little bit older, if you have some impairments, or you just are lazy and don't like lifting heavier boxes, then you can get a smaller box. Just keep in mind, the smaller box you go, the more of them you're going to need to achieve the same space that the bees need. So keep that in mind. Depending on what size of box you want to pick, you can expect to pay $60 per a box. The breakdown is going to be $30 for the box, $30 for the frames, with $3 per frame, a total of 10 frames per box, hence your $60 per box. And for the whole year, a beginning hive, this is probably going a little overboard, but you can expect to be needing between 4 and 5 boxes for that hive that first year. Just on the safe side, we'll go ahead and say 5 boxes. So that's 5 boxes times $60. Then you're going to need a top cover to cover the hive so that way the bees are protected from the elements. A top cover you can expect to pay between $30 and $40 depending on what type you're going to get. Next, for protection, you're going to need to get a veil to protect your head. I consider that a need. Depending on the style you want, you're looking at between $20 and $60. For the smoker, and combined with the smoker fuel, so just the smoker itself, you could be looking at paying between $20 and $30. It's relatively cheap. And the hive tool, you can expect to pay anywhere between $6 and $12, depending on how bare bones basic or fancy you want to get. I myself am lucky enough that I work for a company on the side between this stuff that has very, very good insurance. For me to purchase a brand new EpiPen with insurance is $5. Now, keep that in mind. Me buying an EpiPen is very, very cheap. I have very good insurance. I am very, very lucky, and it's very, very rare for someone to be able to find an EpiPen that cheap. The EpiPen that I purchased is a generic variety. That's why it's a little bit cheaper, but trust me when I tell you, EpiPens, by and large, are not that cheap. They are expensive. On average, if you're looking within the American medical community to buy with cash over the counter EpiPen, you can expect to pay anywhere between $400 and $700 just for one round. It's expensive. Those that have insurance, anywhere between $200 and $400, maybe sometimes a little bit more if your insurance is not as good. EpiPens are expensive, but it is a life-saving tool that is, in my personal belief, critical. That's going to add, let's say, anywhere between $5 and $600. Realistically, more looking at the $400 to $600 range. When you add all of that up together, when you're looking at the necessities of what I consider to be necessary to get into beekeeping, you can expect to pay between $600 and $1,400. Now, we're going to get into items that are not necessary, but I would still highly recommend. First item on this list is going to be an inner cover. That's going to round you off at about $20. Queen excluder, help keep the queen from the brood chamber and the honey chamber, you're looking at about $15. Gloves, $10 to $20. Another thing that I would consider highly recommend is building some sort of a platform to elevate your hive. You can expect to pay anywhere in the $24 to $30 range, depending on how fancy or cheap you want to go. Varroa mite treatment, we talked about this a little bit. You're going to get diseases, you're going to get other buggy boys that kind of attack your hive, and that can range anywhere between $5 and $100. We've mentioned this a little bit before that when you have a brand new hive, you can be attacked by varroa mite. It can or cannot potentially be dangerous, but there are more natural, cheaper ways of doing it. Like, for instance, powdered sugar. You're going to have varroa mite that gets on your bees, dust that whole bad boy with powdered sugar, and the bees are going to be annoyed by being covered in a white powdery substance. They're going to go clean each other off and knock the varroa mite off. It goes down to the bottom of the hive, and it's now there. If you have a screen bottom board, that varroa mite, when it gets knocked down, going to go through the screen straight down to the bottomy dark depths below the hive. That's another reason why I like screen bottom boards. If varroa mites happen to fall off, detritus falls off, it's going to go down into your mite catch, into the bottom of the hive, and not just fall on the solid bottom board, crawl up the side, and find a new friend to hang on to. So, varroa mite treatment, you're looking at $5 to $100. Bee brush, you're looking at $10 to $25. Uncapping knife, you're looking at anywhere between $12 and $200. If you want to go manual, simple butter knife, just saw it off. Or if you want to do a nice, fancy electric knife that's going to make it smooth sailing and the really nice to have but not necessary, that's why you have such a large gap between $12 and $200. Mentioned a little bit before of the entrance reducer to help save the hive from the cold weather. That's going to be $2. Potty pollen patties to help feed your bees if they're a little bit hungry in the wintertime. If you have to bulk them up a little bit, $10. Liquid feed if you're looking needing to substitute honey when you first establish the hive to get them going. You can expect to be in the $10 to $40 range, along with the liquid feeder, which is going to be about that $40, $10 to $40, and the liquid feed itself, $15. Once again, this one you can do on the cheap free by making your own sugar water. Once again, liquid feed is just sugar water as a nectar substitute to help the bees get going if they're struggling or if you're just trying to get the hive established. So, when you take the highly recommended items and add it to the necessary items, your cost variation is now going to be anywhere between $760 up to about $1,875. That's $760 to $1,875 on the high end. Now we're getting into the nice to have but not necessary items. Bee jacket is going to be in the $70 to $120. Bee suits are going to be $150 to $200. Your hand extractor is going to be anywhere between $200 and $800 based on how fancy bells and whistles you want to get on it. Your double strainer, $30. Your 5 gallon buckets, your mason jars is going to be anywhere between $5 and $60, depending on how much you want to get. So once you add the nice to have items to this total running, you can expect to be anywhere between that $1,200 range to $3,000. Now, keep in mind, this is a very wide gap, and this is if you're to purchase everything individually on the nice to have items. That's why you're going to have such a large gap. As I mentioned before, there are a great, tremendous ways of doing things that you can do to make things cheaper. I'm just trying to make it more realistic what you can expect to get into your first year of beekeeping. Me personally, when I first started out, I started everything out for the first month or two for about $500 to $600. That's including the veil, gloves, because I went cheap on those. I got a starter beehive kit, about $220. I purchased a package, which was only about $150. So that was a little bit cheaper. And then I also got an EpiPen, which was only $5. So I got off really cheap in comparison to others. Now, other items, as I expanded out, keep in mind that the more hives you get, you're going to have a lot of this material already. And so the more you expand, the cheaper per unit cost it gets is going to be cheaper. Don't go into this blind thinking it's only going to be 100, $200 because I can buy the bees for 150 bucks. There is a lot of equipment that is necessary and nice to have to purchase that very quickly increases that final price tag. Now, when you're doing this as well, one thing to keep in mind as you're looking to purchase this equipment, please, please don't be like what I've seen so many times before. On the day that people go to pick up their bees, they go to their local farm and ranch store. Many times at my local farm and ranch store, you can buy bee equipment and order bees from the exact same location. I cannot tell you how many times I have seen people go pick up their bees. Immediately after they pick up their bees, they go buy their equipment, they go buy their setup, and then they go, okay, great, let's go home. They've never set up the equipment before. They've never got everything prepped beforehand. They don't have the feed ready. While they've got bees that are in a package or in a nuke on a time clock that are rapidly dying. Make certain you play with the equipment beforehand. Ideally, I would recommend the day that those bees arrive at your local farm and ranch store, the day they arrive at the post office and where you're receiving them, or if you're picking them up from your local beekeeper, have everything prepped and ready to go. Have it work with that equipment, study it, know your equipment, and play with it before you install your bees so that way you become familiar with it. If you're gaining good value out of this information we've shared today, if you really like what we're doing, please, we'd appreciate if you share this podcast. Go ahead and give it a review, 5 stars. We really appreciate it. The more you share with this with other people, the more we are going to be able to go ahead and spread this knowledge and share it with others. We really appreciate what you're doing. If you're following us via YouTube, go ahead and support the channel by subscribing, give us a thumbs up. If you're going via whatever media podcast service you go, tell us your friends about it, give us a 5 star review. It really helps us out with the analytics if you're gaining value from this information, which we greatly appreciate. Thank you so very much. And we look forward to seeing you next time. And in next week's episode, we are going to be talking about plant genetics, what they are, if they're going to be the end of the world, or if it's actually going to save the world by which overpopulation. So that's going to be our subject for next week is the dreaded GMO or genetically modified diseases and a little bit of a history behind it and the true nature of how evil or good it may be for the human race.